because I'll be honest with you, the two previous churches that I was a member of, it was, hey, do you have a gun? Cool. You want to be a part of the church security team? And that was the extent of the training. Welcome to the Enduring Church podcast, hosted by Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis, helping pastors grow their churches while equipping the body to love their neighbors. Yeah, their literal neighbors. Nathan, we are back with the Enduring Church podcast. How you doing?
We are back, and I'm feeling really safe and secure about this subject that we're going to discuss today.
Well, I am. It's funny because with my background, we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But there's just an assumption that I know a lot about this, but I might know about as much as you do in regards to church security. But before we get started, my name is Michael Davis.
And I'm Nathan Castleberry, and I've never been asked to be on a security team.
Again, this is the Enduring Church podcast, and thank you all for joining us. So I need to take a step back before we take a question, because I think maybe getting a little bit of an understanding about my background might be helpful for people and maybe make a little bit more sense as to why every single church that I have belonged to since coming to faith has said, it makes sense that you join the security team. So back in 2005, I made the decision. Actually, I made the decision back in September 11th of 2001 that I really wanted to serve my country. But there was a lot of things going on in my life. And frankly, when I went to the recruiting station on September 11th, the line was literally into the parking lot. And I was lazy and I was like, I'll just do it later. And then I continued just to live my life. But it was actually, I would say late 2004, and then definitely in 2005, as the war in Iraq was really starting to turn for the worse, I made the decision to enlist in the U.S. Army. I wish the job that I picked had nothing to do with anything that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to fight, and I made the choice for Cav Scout for no other reason than it was the largest bonus that they were giving, which, by the way, in hindsight, might have been a poor choice. But yeah, so I enlisted. I had a 15-month deployment, which we maybe can talk a little bit about. It wasn't good. I was with the 3rd Infantry Division with 5-7 Cav, and you guys can Google that if you want to.
Is that out of Savannah?
Yeah, that's right. It was at Fort Stewart, which actually, interestingly enough, that was I met my wife at a, what do you call it? It was down on River Street. She was with a girls' weekend. We talked for 15 minutes. She left, and that's actually how I met my wife. So
did y'all trade MySpace information?
Yeah, we did. That's right. We traded MySpace, or we tried to change MySpace information. Finally, she just gave me your digits, and then the rest is history. But it was a very bad deployment. If you Google 5-7 Cav, you'll know why. We were actually detached to the Marines and started in started in Ramadi, then south of Fallujah, and then went back to the Army down to South Baghdad. But don't need to get into the specifics. It was bad. But get out, and then years later come to faith, and then people hear about my past, and they were like, you should be on church security. And I was like, unless you're wanting me to do a traffic control point or a raid or set up a machine gun emplacement, I don't see a lot of similarities between my experience but obviously church security has been something a way that I have served. So I do have some thoughts, but a little bit of background as to why everyone is asking me. And actually, again, that's why the gold spurs, because I was in the Cav. And if there's any infantry guys, go ahead with the jokes, the Girl Scout jokes and all the other ones. But yes, I was a Cav Scout.
No, I don't have any jokes. That's part of your story that I'm, very high level familiar with. And, on behalf of our listeners, thank you, Michael. You are American hero.
Well, we'll get into the political areas of that, but you're welcome. I don't ever know how to respond to that.
I know. I often wonder if soldiers actually like the awkward "thank you for your service." I don't know.
It's strange, and there might be some folks who might disagree with me, but my politics on it changed drastically about 15 minutes after I got in country. Don't know how much freedom I secured, but we'll potentially get into that in later
So
episodes.
what if we started thanking church security guards for their service?
Thank you for checking out the Enduring Church podcast on YouTube. If you could do us a favor, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you're aware whenever a new episode drops. Also, if you got some time, give us a thumbs up and also leave a comment. Really helps us with the algorithm. Well, now back to the show.
Yeah, that actually, and you know what? It's funny enough. Every week, people come up to me and other members of our emergency response team and thank us for our service. It's actually
That's
really,
cool.
really nice, and I feel like I've contributed more to their safety and freedom than I did when I was in Iraq. But
Wow.
we'll get
Okay.
We'll get into that.
Let's get into that.
Awesome. So let's get to the first question. And I would actually like your take on this first, and just hearing, like, why do you think church security has become, such a widespread concern? And at what cultural or societal changes have driven its necessity in recent years? What do you think?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting that that's the wording for question number one, widespread concern.
Yeah.
I might even try to push back on the question a little bit. I don't know that it's as widespread as it maybe could or should be, right? And I think a lot of that depends on church size and parts of the country and whatnot. I feel like I've been to places where it's it's either super super incognito or it's like not a thing at all.
Yeah.
I remember that whenever I was a part of a church plant, my first staff position back in 2005. So you were joining the military, I was joining
Yeah, that's
joining a
right.
church staff, and we didn't have security at all.
Yeah.
But now, fast forward to past few churches I've served at, it has been a big thing. But I think we all can look back over the last decade and think about school shootings and church shootings and kind of realize it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And trying to just do it in a way that you can overdo it where people actually feel less safe.
Yeah.
A show of force can be threatening to bad guys, but it can be kind of unsettling to the congregation. So trying to do it in a way where it's like your church knows that things have been thought through, but not in a way that's like, bring it on,
Yeah. No, I think I'm wondering, it's the same thing in regards to your point, to school shootings and the widespread, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, not fear, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that even though these things are super, like these types of attacks are super rare, whenever they happen, there's just such amazing amount of media coverage.
Right.
But I do think that it's one of those things where, as our country gets more and more polarized, even though it shouldn't be, and people can watch our episode on church and politics, I think that for a lot of folks, there is a conflation, wrongly, I would hope, but maybe not always, of church being political. And that potentially, if they are very angry, that they might see this as a way to make their anger known. So it's one of those things where I think to you, what you said earlier was right. It's better to have it and not need it, and then need it and not have it. But I think that in my church, and I'm sure that the guys on there are guys and gals on there are going to be listening and watching this. There are other things that a church security team, and we'll talk about that can be responsible for, that makes it more than just a bunch of dudes and gals with guns.
Right. Right.
So,
which I think you could almost recommend that. I think we've all seen churches where the security ministry really is just the 2A people. It's like we're just giving them their outlet to be pro gun and all this type of stuff. And so yeah, I think there's wise, I'm not even gonna say a right and wrong, I'm gonna say wise ways to do it and less wise ways to do it.
Yeah. And I think, we can get into what makes a good church security team, but I would like to also say that, and actually really like the fact that our church security team is actually called emergency response team, because the truth is that there are a lot more emergencies than that don't involve like an active shooter.
Right.
And the probability of you dealing with an emergency that doesn't require you taking the holster, your gun out of your holster, is just a lot more frequent. So here's a good example:
choking on communion.
Yeah, that's right.
Listen,
No,
with such a heavy topic, I'm gonna have to you're gonna have to endure.
Stop it. We've already discussed this is not a pun. It's not a pun.
Jokes.
It's not a pun. It's not a pun. No, but I mean, we had a medical emergency just a couple months ago, and everyone on the emergency response team is CPR and first aid certified, because we know, especially considering our church has a lot of older members in it. And so the probability of someone having a heart attack or a stroke or some other type of medical emergency at our church is very, very high. We even have like actually dedicated medical personnel that are always on call on Sunday. We actually also have security team members during Wednesday when we have our Awana or the other events. There's always security presence, but it's not about having guys with guns ready for a situation where they're going to have to draw those guns. But let's say a kid gets hurt, so someone falls down and maybe someone breaks an arm. How do you deal with that while we're waiting for paramedics to come? So I think that maybe we rethink how church security is, and really, and I've said this, and I'm not the first person to say this, but can we make them a member of our welcome team that is there in case something happens? And then also, this is super important, we'll talk about this in the future, how are they trained? And that's really, really important, because I've seen the gamut.
Yeah. But I would wonder if it's how is maybe not the right beginning to that question, if they're trained.
Yeah.
Sadly. But yeah, we've got some things that we've learned that we've done well with our church, some things that we've not done well, and one of the things that I do feel like was one of our better decisions was to do exactly what you just said. Viewing our security team as an extension of our hospitality team has been a good way to kind of help put some categories and some expectations around the way that team even carries themselves. And I've got some cool stories of how that has like played out into some really ministry minded scenarios.
But you're right. It can be very off-putting, and it can make people a little bit nervous as to why those people are there.
Right. We don't want our church members and guests to show up and be like, wait, has there been a threat? Like,
yeah.
Is there something I should be? So, but we also want them to be like, we want them to show and be like, well, if there was, like, I'm okay, So there's just a posture about this whole thing that I think is worth kind of dusting off and figuring out what's the right posture.
No, for sure. And I credit where credit's due. We have two guys in particular at our church that have really created a really good church security plan that I think is, I think initially I was like, wow, this is a bit overboard. But in hindsight, seeing what we've done, I think has been super helpful in regards to the level of training. Because I'll be honest with you, the two previous churches that I was a member of, it was, hey, do you have a gun? Cool. You want to be a part of the church security team? And that was the extent of the training, which again, and I'll tell you, we all know folks who I am comfortable with them being somewhere else with a gun, but not necessarily around me and my family.
Sure.
One of the things, there's a couple things that are marks that I think are maybe some lessons that other churches can implement. Number one is that we all wear lanyards that are of a certain color. Not only do our members know what those lanyards mean, but importantly, law enforcement knows what those lanyards mean.
Smart.
So there's a specific color. Number two, everyone has to get trained. Everyone has to go through even though that we live in a constitutional carry state, everyone has to go get their carry permit. And that right there gives an extra added background investigation. We all have to go through Ministry Safe. We all have to have a background check, which I think most normal, even churches that don't require additional training will have people do that, because
hopefully that's baseline.
That's baseline, exactly. But then we all have to go through church security training twice a year. We all have firearms training through a USCCA licensed member, or teacher, which actually is also a member of our church, which is super helpful. The church actually provides ammunition, believe it or not, for that training, so that if someone
That's
is
generous, that's nice.
Yeah, so it's there's no like financial burden on folks, because some of us, we can afford the ammo and it's not a problem. For some others, 100 rounds of ammo is a decent amount of money. We give them recommendations and that training, and then on top of that, so in class training twice a year, firearms training I think once or twice a year, and then additionally we have medical training for folks like that.
Yeah.
And then we work with the additional with like the welcome team. We work with the hospitality team. We work with small group leaders. We have radios, and that's a whole other thing about how we work with radios and how we. But the thing is, there's a scenario, and we find out, and it's actually one of the things that's really nice, is that a lot of the members who are on the security team, we literally had I wouldn't call it live fire training, but we actually had people with simunitions that came in, and we did some training in regards to how we address threats. How do we do this? Again, when I first got there, I was like, man, this is nuts. Like, these people are way overboard. And listen, usually serving on the security team is one of the easiest ways to serve, because it doesn't really require, but like, this was like, oh man, I thought that this was going to be easy. But we found out a lot of folks were, at the end of the training, were like, man, I need more training. I didn't hit the person that I was supposed to, and I hit the person I wasn't supposed to. And it was one of those things where it's like, but if we didn't have that training, they wouldn't know about it.
What's the statement? It may be a law enforcement or maybe military statement. I've heard it from a lot of the folks on our security team. But you rise to the level of your training.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so I think that's a truism in leadership, in public speaking. Just whatever you do often, you get good at. So I think that training aspect is really crucial, really important. And I really encourage to hear the level of training that your church puts into it. We're not quite that robust, but we do have several things calendared throughout the year. Most of our team is ex-law enforcement. One of them actually works for a private security organization, and his job is to like go around the country and do active shooter training. So there is a level of robust in there. But one of the things that I definitely resonated with, you said earlier, is the emergency side of things is equally as important, and also statistically much higher likelihood.
So much higher. Much higher.
So we've had to deal with, cuts and bruises and bandages, but also seizures and whatnot. So one of the things that I love that our security team does in tandem with our next gen kids ministry volunteers is like the CPR first aid training. So that's a way just to kind of keep our security team ministry minded, putting all these ex-law enforcement guys around a bunch of kids ministry, small group leaders and whatnot. Has been a really, really cool, beneficial way to kind of tether it to, you are an extension of the ministry team. You are not this elite separate Green Beret outfit, right? So that's been really big. And there's all sorts of, like, here in Cherokee County, like there's New Life just a few weeks ago hosted something that was like several churches, and it was a specialization in church security. So just finding, like, that's probably true in most communities, it's for the smaller churches. It may not feel like they know where to turn, or like a lot of times the larger churches will facilitate these things that may have an open invite to other ministries in the area.
I would want to caution certain churches, because there are a lot of consulting companies out there that are trying to make a buck off of church security. And you'll recognize them because they'll be super gun ho, and like they'll be like, we got to do this, and it's like they're all speaking like they're trying to talk to a bunch of, to your point, special forces soldiers, and there's no love in it. The truth is that we're called first and foremost to not, I wouldn't even say protect, to love the people who are in our congregation. And to your point, what you said there, the probability of a medical emergency happening as compared to an active shooting is I wouldn't even say way more. I mean, exponentially more likely.
Right.
But this actually brings a point, because during our last training, no one froze as to what to do during the active shooter thing. They knew what they were doing, and they did their little thing. They went in there, they engaged the target. Again, this is all outside, because I'm pretty sure my pastor would be upset if we fired simunitions inside. But most people did. I mean, maybe some people didn't shoot as well as they would like to, but they had the general idea. We were doing a medical emergency training that kind of came out of nowhere, where they just kind of popped it up, and people just stood around and just looked at each other to figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
And that's super, super important. And it's one of the reasons why this training is so important, not necessarily just to teach you what to do, but also how to deal with a situation that you weren't prepared for. I've seen legitimate guys who have had a ton of experience, a ton of training, even some with a substantial amount of deployments, that when they see something new, they completely freeze and freak out. I had one guy in particular, not going to share too many war stories, but the guy had been on his third deployment, and we had come up to a scene that was it was the stuff that of nightmares, and most people just like, I'm not going to get into it, but he saw something that was just one thing too much and completely lost it. He literally, and he actually never went back out. I mean, aside from traveling, but they moved him into headquarters, and that was where he stayed, because it was that one thing too much. But there are people who have never experienced anything. So this is the reason why training and repetition, but it's not just about that active shooting. It's about someone is literally having a seizure in front of you. Someone's having a heart attack. You know what you're supposed to do. But if you haven't had that training in 2 or 3 years, your brain is goes into this fight or flight mode, and you just stand there and you forget everything that you've learned.
Yeah. I'm trying to, it's been probably 4 or 5 years since I personally received an AED training.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know that I'd rise to the occasion very well.
Yeah.
I could pray for a miracle, but I don't know that I remember exactly where the leads go on an AED. So yeah, that's feeling like there's some things I should probably join in the next training.
Yeah. And this is fundamentally, it's about loving the people, and and training always, you train for the most common scenarios the most often,
Right.
and you train. But that being said, it's just like anything. And you said this, and I'm going to keep saying this as well. Everything we do within church needs to be done at a level of excellence, and that's including security. So this actually brings up to my question, and I think this is because you're pastor. How can a church balance being open and accessible to their community while ensuring safety for their congregation? Because we don't want to freak people out.
Yeah. So on Sundays, I think we get this right, just because we've got I do feel really good about our safety and security team. But during the week, that's where a lot of the vulnerabilities are in most churches. Our friends that have done a lot of consulting in this space would call the weekday church office a soft target. So that's that's a really, really tricky thing, and I think that's where you're not just wanting to prepare volunteers for that, but actually say what have you done to maybe have your staff start thinking through some of these things. So we've trained our staff on some of that stuff. It's been a while. We probably need to revisit it. But I think that's just as much of an area of vulnerability as Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings, obviously, there's a lot more people around.
Yeah.
But yeah, the weekday, the weeknight, the Awanas, the Bible studies, those type of things should factor in, and that's definitely a part of our plan where we might be a little bit more. That might be where we're a little bit behind the 8 ball with our local church. But I think Sunday mornings, so many factors go into considering this, and the starting line is not the same when you think about church size, church location. Is it portable? Is it in a school building, or is it in a church building? Like all these things have to go into consideration to figure out like what's the most beneficial way for us to open up to the community in a way where we have thought through some of these things. And so yeah, to me, it's there's no um, silver bullet. Is that a pun? Does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that works, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean,
right?
if we have werewolves coming to our churches, but yeah, no, absolutely.
So I think for me, it's not a one size fits all. It really does have to be that, like, knowing your context, knowing the lay of the land. Like when we've our church is only 4 years old and we were very nomadic, so we've had to rewrite our plan 4 or 5 times based on the locations we've been in and out of. So I think in a lot of ways that document might need to be kind of fluid. Like your protocol might need to have a level of fluidity. And it's worth constantly revisiting and adding revisions to see like, okay, what have we not thought of and whatnot. We one time, this is a long time ago in Florida where anything goes.
Florida man comes to your church, that'd be sweet.
So we had this guy who was like the self-proclaimed martial arts expert, and just this very, let's just call it, eclectic personality.
We all know those guys. We all know those guys.
Yeah. Like think the dude with like the American flag pants that was on on Funny
Napoleon
or Die.
died. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. The martial arts guy, Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah. So that personality, wanting to serve everywhere. One Sunday, he put a bullet in the offering bucket and wrote his name on the envelope and it was so strange. And he viewed it as this act of worship and surrender. And our count team was like, call the security team. Like,
that's scary as all get out, man. That's scary.
So it's like even thinking through, like, how do you respond? Is this a subtle hint? Is this a threat? Like
the mob used to, that's how they threatened people, was they would give them a bullet.
Yeah. So Florida man puts a bullet in the offering basket.
I'll say that the way you balance it is actually doing good security. And any police officer you've ever talked to, and by the way, we have a couple police officers that actually work that we actually contract with, and we'll get that into the future. But one of the things they'll always say is the best way to be able to judge the intent of a person is to talk to them.
Yeah.
And it's really good because, when someone's coming in, especially someone you don't know, is coming in, being super friendly, asking them how they're doing, welcoming them to church, seeing how they're interacting, seeing if there's a problem. Oftentimes that's how you can balance it, just being really hospitable and being welcoming. This is what we were talking about, that welcome team thing.
I feel I'm going to just kind of throw myself at the mercy of the court on this one. Actually, this is fairly recently, within the last couple of months. Usually, after I'm done preaching, I go back to my spot on the front row for the last worship song, and I like to be in the lobby and welcoming and visiting and connecting with people after service. So during that last worship song, about halfway through the song, I exit the auditorium and make my way to the lobby. And as I was walking out, I noticed this dude, and man looks at the outside, God looks on the inside. I know. But I just made a bunch of snap judgments about this dude solely based on his appearance. Just this dude looks super out of place. It looked like somebody from Sons of Anarchy, but like with major jittery, let's be generous and call it ADHD. But if I'm being like super judgmental, it's like, cocaine high.
He's on something. Yeah.
It was, I was very, and if, as our listeners get to know me, like I'm a person of like low discernment. I'm usually just like, we're all best friends. So anytime I do have like little spidey senses go off, I'm like, okay, this only happens like once a year. I'm going to lean in. But I was really proud of my security team because I was like, hey, see this guy, third row from the back. And dude, I mean, he was just dancing like rave dancing to a very reflective altar call type song. So I'm like, what is going on here? And so check this out. My security team had already kind of flagged him. They'd already had a talk with him. And they were like, actually, he's visiting from one of our sister churches in Dawsonville. Like they had already had a great conversation ministerially. So they're like, hey, dude, we're on it. No worries. Here's a little bit of his backstory. And I was able to feel just so proud that they had a ministry approach to it, not just this dude looks weird. That sadly, that was my approach, right? I'm the pastor, and I was approaching it as like bad guy, purely judge it on externals. So turns out he was just a quirky dude that was excited to visit a church in our family of churches.
That's awesome. And, that's something that I was not prepared for coming into this church. And actually another friend of mine, a dear brother that is also serves in a church, as how much the security team knows about the people who are coming there.
Yeah.
And even people that we don't feel comfortable telling them they can't be there, but that we're keeping an eye on whenever they're there. There's one guy in particular who he had a head injury or something like that. Again, I don't want to give too many details, but he's a little bit off. He said some things that weren't necessarily appropriate to some of the women that are there, but he's obviously dealing with the results of a head injury. And we love the fact that he's at church and that he's worshiping with us, but we keep an eye on him. And we make sure that if he's going somewhere, that someone is always keeping an eye on him. But after talking to some of one of my buddies who's also doing that, he says, yeah, there's like 3 or 4 of those guys in my church, and we just keep an eye on them, and then we talk to them, and we're constantly just judging if they're having a good day or a bad day. If you look at some of the past church shootings and even school shootings, there are usually signs, and that there's certain signs, but as far as the way that they're behaving, the way that they're presenting themselves, sometimes it could be bad, sometimes it's not. And you've experienced it when it's not. But the truth is, this is why just having a conversation with someone will oftentimes, not only are you having the opportunity to show them compassion and that you care about them, but then you're also just really getting, judging better. So that you're not making those split decisions on how they look. I mean, look at me. I've got tattoos everywhere. And I'm in shape and I'm tall and I'm big. Well, kind of in shape, but I can be an intimidating person if you don't know who I am. And people have made decisions or snap judgments about me until they realize that I'm not out for any type of like bad, intentions. But here's the thing. Let's just put security out of the way. How many times are people coming into our churches who need the love of Jesus like anyone else, but we're making judgments based on just outward appearances?
Yeah, guilty. Yep, I've been there.
No, we've all been there. And I think that this is where there's a huge opportunity for not just church security, but also just the believers in general. We were all dead in sin until Jesus showed us who he was and the Spirit showed us who Jesus is. And I think that oftentimes we look at someone and we make an assumption that they are, maybe that they're too far gone and even Jesus can't save them. And more often than not, this isn't a person who's out to hurt you or your church. This is a person who the Spirit is prompting, and that he's giving you an opportunity to be a part of their story. They might not speak like you do. They definitely might not look like you do. They may have a past that you can find reprehensible, but that's the glory of the cross.
I mean, think about it. Let's say that someone did show up with harm in mind and a conversation that was initiated by the Holy Spirit could change that. I mean, we got to believe in the fact that the kindness of God is what leads people to repentance. And so just having that in the back of mind, maybe even having that at the top of mind as a church safety, security, emergency response team. We're Christ followers first. We are fishers of men first. And that's not mutually exclusive. That's not prohibitive of protecting the sheep, So yeah, I love hearing about that as the posture of safety and security, having them be ministry minded. There was There was a time when we were kicked out of a building not too long ago, and so we were literally worshiping in a tent on and so we were very, very vulnerable. And our security team was like, we need to find the money to contract law enforcement to be present with us.
Yeah.
And they're like, that we just feel like that would help us do our job a little bit better. So, it was expensive, it was for a small church, like that was a big price, because there's like an hourly minimum that these law enforcement officers off duty, need to get. But what that did during that season when we were, because some of the Sundays we weren't out in a tent, some of we were just out on a green space, so there's literally no boundaries. And it was Mother's Day of 2023. And after church, we were, we set up these like just table stations to just love on the moms. We had these little mocktails called them mom mimosas. It was like, sparkling grape juice and orange.
My tooth just started hurting from the sweetness of that. That's great.
So we're doing all these things, but because we were in a green area, like a public space, random families were just coming up to celebrate Mother's Day, not even aware the church was there. And one of the security guys just connected with one of these families and come and found me. And they're like, hey, Nathan, I want you to meet this family. They're just here at the mill enjoying the AstroTurf. Is it okay if they enjoy some of the refreshments? They've brought their grandkids. And it was like, I never would have met those visitors if it wasn't for our security team thinking ministry first. And I was just so grateful for that.
Yeah. And by the way, hear me out. There's nothing that will, if you look at past active shootings, especially both at the school shooting level and then also at church level, a police car in front of your church or near your church or near the entrance, these people are looking for. So aside from what you were saying, but I wanted to mention that it's expensive. It can be expensive, but if there's an incident that doesn't happen is way more preferable than an incident that you're able to respond to. Let's just say that. Yeah. So hear me out when I say that, working with law enforcement is always helpful, but as long as they're understanding that they need to also be a part of your welcome team, because we've interacted with that. But that being said, to kind of wrap this up in a bow, I think that the posture needs to be one of ministry. Listen, we know that Scripture is very clear that life is a gift that's been instilled, it has been given to people by God, and that no one has the authority to remove that unless very specific things. Protecting life is important. Jesus said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak. There's nothing in Scripture that says that we are to be like allowing people to hurt us. So that from a theological perspective, Scripture, it doesn't say thou shalt not kill. It says thou shalt not murder. It's right. So there is that we should be there to protect the flock, and we should be there to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's with excellence, that is trained, not just in regards to situations that require physical force, but also that require medical training and that require just being able to deal with an emergency in a way that is done with excellence. But fundamentally, we need to be a part of a team that is welcoming, that doesn't judge people based on outward appearance, but that is done in a way that reflects the love of Jesus. I think if we can do that, I think that we are an extra added benefit to the church, not just something there that break in case of emergency. Because I've seen it. It's either an afterthought, or people can go way overboard with like long guns and all the other crazy things, which, by the way, listen, as long as your posture is right, you can have whatever, tools that you feel like you need, and it's all mission dictates, right? But it really is about just, do you reflect the love of Jesus first, and then, focus on protecting the flock second?
We're getting close to Christmas when this episode is recorded, so I've got an idea for how to love on your security team.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah. Oh, no.
The body armor of Christ.
The body armor of Christ. That's nice. Everyone, are you going to buy soft armor for all your security team?
Yeah. Okay, why not?
Nice. It can get kind of expensive. Well, listen, we're going off the rails.
Christian Kevlar.
Christian Kevlar. Will that stop? Okay.
You're going to have to cut me off here in a minute.
Okay, I'm cutting you off right now. Hey, listen, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for joining us, and just really appreciate all of you guys. And have a good one.
Stay safe.
This has been the Enduring Church Podcast with Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis. We'll see you next time.